Hello pets, welcome back to BADragon Master. Today we're doing a monster focus, and the monster I chose is the Humble Goblin. I don't think that a lot of dungeon masters and players appreciate this particular creature. The goblins are more than just cannon fodder, though most games treat them as such. I mean, you start the game level 1, you have a couple of different monsters that you can run into at level 1. You have skeletons, zombies, goblins, kobolds, and, dogs or whatever. But the goblin is a very common enemy that we run into. They have a wide variety of simple uses, but the players and the dungeon masters tend not to understand how they could use these as a core element in a campaign, or at least in an adventure. So we're going to go over that a little bit today. We're going to start with the stats, and then we'll move on to living conditions and social structures. And in the end, we'll talk about how best to use what we've learned in an adventure. So, statistics-wise, goblins have not changed that much over the years. If you grabbed a goblin sheet from Basic Edition, from First Edition, Second Edition, Third, Fourth, Fifth, Revised, it doesn't really matter. The stats haven't changed that much. But in 5th Edition, they are considered average in every stat, as you can see. 18 strength, so low average strength, 14 dexterity, so plus 2 of dexterity. But Constitution, Intelligence, Wisdom, and Charisma are all average or just below average. This is the average goblin. The stats haven't changed. They're pretty much the same from version to version, which is good. Couple minor differences. The number of experience points you get per goblin has changed. The original Basic Edition, it was like 5. Now it's like 50. And it's amazing how much that's changed. But all things considered, stats are good, but they're not fantastic. So the way they're set up is it's expected that the players are going to run into 2 to 10 in that range, 2 to 6-ish goblins in every encounter. So you have a party of 6 players, you should have at least 1 goblin per player at level 1. At level 2, you should have about 1.5 goblins per player, maybe 2 depending on your party's items. By the time you get to level 5, you should be having like 5 to 8 per player at these basic stats. Kind of gives you an idea. The challenge rating can let you know that each player should be able to take on 4 goblins at a time. Really, it's not that big of a deal. Goblins are easy. 5th edition has for the goblin boss, real quick, give you kind of different ideas. The goblin boss they gave him armor. So he's got better armor class. They gave him 6 hit dice. Gave him 6 hit dice. So he is got 21 hit points. In old terms, he'd be level 6. Current terms, he's like level 3 or 4, maybe? Maybe? I'd say level 3. I think I have a challenge rating of 1. Which means that any player at level 1 or level 2 can go 1-on-1 and win. No problem there. That's about right. They gave him a little bit better stats. Not much, not significant, but a little better. And they gave him basically everything else is normal. Except he's got a little more attacks. They gave some more ideas on other advantages. He's technically a fighter with the multi-attack skill. So he can attack he can attack twice per round. And by himself, 1 or 2 adventurers would easily overpower him. With his army, with 10 goblins with him, it wouldn't be too bad. But this is overly simplified. Goblin society is simple. Goblins have a hierarchical society where they have a king, chief, boss, lieutenant, foot soldier type society. So at the top you have the king. The king runs multiple dens or warrens. You have a boss, or chief, which runs a single den or warren. You have lieutenants, which run sections of the den or warren. And then you have individuals at the bottom. Now, throughout all of D&D, we've looked at the warrens as being somewhere between 40 and 400 goblins. Kind of gives you an idea how big a den or warren is. There are several different types of dens and warrens, but when it comes to their societal structure, it's very important to understand that they are communal. They love their community. Their community is everything. If you don't fit into their community, then they will kill you, quite honestly. Because you're considered an outcast. You're considered not goblin if you don't believe what they believe. So to make their beliefs relatively standard, they have some gods. They have this belief in community and hierarchical structure. And they do not venture from home. Not as this individual. They'll go as groups, like they'll do a raiding party and they'll put together like 20 warg riders and they'll go haul out into the nearest farm village, raid some food, raid some, cattle or whatever, maybe steal some weapons, and then they'll run back home, back to their town or warren. But they're not going to send like one lone goblin scout out to look for stuff. It's not what they do. The goblins you see in a lot of media really are more like orcs or hobgoblins, with a little more individual, though they do like to travel in packs. D&D goblins are very pack animals. So keep that in mind when you're designing your dungeons. You're going to have players run into 3 to 5 of them. Very easily. It's going to be tight spaces. Because goblins are small, their warrens and dungeons are usually small. Keep that in mind. Most dungeon masters don't understand this concept. Space is a 5D problem. 5e problem. You cannot convey space to your players properly when it's completely narrative. So take, for example, Lord of the Rings. They did goblins in 2 different ways. You had Goblin Town in The Hobbit, and you had Moria in The Lord of the Rings Fellowship. In both cases, they were living in a very large cavernous space. In the first case, we're looking at a large cave that's been hollowed out over hundreds of years, and a very large den. So 400 to 700 in that area, and probably total den size is several thousand. Easy in that area. In Moria, they had the big mines, the ruin, big open spaces. This is one way they live, but they also can live in small dugouts. So keep that in mind. Goblins live in 3 different environments. They live in self-dug holes. They live in natural or carved caves, and they live in ruins. Those are the 3 main areas you'll find goblins. The first one, the self-dug hole, this area is literally what it sounds like. They dug a hole, dug it out like an ant colony, and made it big enough for them. So you might find an entry door that's 3 feet or less tall, so it's roughly 3 feet. It goes in, And your players, who are, mind you, 5 to 6 feet, they're going to be crawling or at least crouching as they go through this. When they get to the main rooms, these might have 4 or 5 foot ceilings. Big, expansive. Think the Hobbit. Okay? Think this way. You're Gandalf walking into Bilbo's house. You're going to have a low ceiling, you're going to hit your head. These things are going to happen in a small goblin den. So, you have to understand this as a player and as a DM. You cannot use big, large weapons in here. You can barely use swords, maybe a bow. But it's going to be dark, it's going to be dank. Your players are going to be always crouched. And the goblins, who can naturally just traverse the area freely, are going to get a lot of hidey holes. They can use sneak attacks from hidden holes. They can scurry away into holes. They can scurry down a hallway. They can scurry into another room. They can come from another room. Your players should always be at a disadvantage in this environment. And yes, in 5e terms, you are rolling 2d20s, and you're always taking the lesser number. This is true. This is the way it should be played. So keep that in mind. If you want to give your players a challenge, give them a natural dugout of goblins. It doesn't matter what their level is. They can be level 20. Doesn't matter. These goblins in this environment have the advantage at all times. They're going to cause damage to your players. They might even win because of the tactics involved. Think tactically. Don't think in numbers. Think tactically. 5e doesn't want you to think in numbers. It doesn't want you to think in maps. It wants you just to have a nice time, fun role-play. But tactical advantage is important. And goblins have that. Their tactics are numbers, strategy of being hidden and attacking from the shadows, and usage of their wargs. Now, I don't remember if 5e uses the wargs much, I never remember. But it's one of those things that you have to take all these things into consideration, not just some of them. So the next environment is the natural cave, which is the same as the warren, as the helm dugout warren. It's just bigger. So in this case, the players would have only some areas where they have to roll a disadvantage, and the rest of them they're just able to roll normally. So keep that in mind. And keep an idea on which areas they would have a disadvantage on, like say hallways or some of the natural dugouts rooms, and then in some of the more natural in the natural cave areas, the rocky areas, the area is big enough for them to move around normally. This would be like the gathering halls for eating and sleeping and so on. That's really the bigger dens, the bigger parts of the dens. So those would be natural. So keep that in mind, that they would have that. Third camp, which is the last one. This is the ruins that have been taken over. So this could be an old town, it could be a temple, it could be an underground catacombs. Be inventive. It can be whatever you want. But remember, they didn't build it. So it's not goblin size. It is somebody else's size. It is for humans. It is for orcs. It is for elves, dwarves, or it could be for giants. Who knows? Maybe they had a giant overlord at one point, and he died, and now the goblins are just taking over the ruins. So keep that in mind. Who built the ruins? That'll give you architecture. That'll give you layouts. That'll give you ideas for designs, ideas for traps, the ways the rooms are laid out. So keep all of that in mind when you're designing your dungeon. But for goblins, they're not partial to that. They don't, that's about it. All they care about is it a nice big space they can have their community. That's what they're looking for. So keep that in mind. Goblins are religious. It's not something that is talked about much, but they do actually have a pantheon. You have, okay, Maglubyet. Sorry, Maglublyet. Maglubyet, who is their greater god. And he has a couple of lesser gods underneath him. You have the lesser god of Kurgobyet, Kurgorbeyag. You have Nomagaya. And the last one is Bargraldak. These four gods are the gods of the goblins. So if you have a goblin shaman or a priest, they're going to be worshipping one of these gods. Goblins in general will always go to their high god. So, Maglubyet is always going to be the one that they worship most, because he's their high god, and he's a very selfish god. He wants to keep everything to himself. But he also believes in war and conquest, and knows that he can't do it himself, but he keeps very hands-on with his little goblins. His other minions represent war, fighting. They represent stability, which is the three core tenets of the goblins. So keep that in mind. The religion is not something that most dungeon masters or players focus on, because why would you? But the fact that they have religion means that you can do more. You could be chasing down the high priest of the goblin religion, and he is their high king. He's a witch king or whatever. And that is your goal, is to fight him and take him down and break up the goblin tribes in the community, because they're amassing this army that's going to be trying to assault your city. The problem is they're relatively weak. So how do you fix that? We'll get to that in a minute. But the priests are the goals. Yeah, they're the high points. So if you do something like that, keep in mind that they do have gods, and that these gods have symbols. They have ways of doing things. They like blood sacrifice. They want all of these evil, dark, carnal, communal environments. So keep that in mind. The last section we're going to cover is how to make them more usable. So we have all of these little areas. We've got a society. We've got basic stats. We've got some religion. We got some ideas on structure and where they could live and so on. But how do you actually scale such a weak sounding and looking creature from the 5e perspective in order to make it work? Well, to do that, you have to either be inventive, you have to borrow stats, or you have to come up with something new. The answer is, you really don't need to do any of that. You can look up a book from Dungeons & Dragons 2nd edition and revised. So around that time period, there was a book released that was called The Complete Book of Humanoids. And I'm going to put the goblin page for this on the screen so you can read it as well. But this particular book allowed players to play as normally non-player characters. So you could play as a goblin, an orc, a pixie, a fremen. There's a bunch of unique races in here. Now, do I recommend this for players? The only time I recommend doing this is if you're doing like a whole Inhuman campaign. But in this book, there are the stats on how to handle a goblin as a player. And because it gives us those stats, we can now use that to our advantage. So if you look at the board, the stats for the goblins have a low end of 3 to 5, which is about average with a human. Not too bad there. And they have high stats. Aren't bad. You know, wisdom and intelligence can be 18s. Dexterity can be 16. Dexterity can be 17. Constitution can be 16. Strength can be 15. These are stats you can work with. Okay? The stats they gave for the boss is like the head, like what I would consider like a lieutenant or the head of a small tribe. But if you want to have a goblin king or a priest king or something like that, somebody who's ruling a lot of people, you need a higher level character. So maybe you need a level 10 fighter, or a level 9 cleric, or a level 7 shaman or witch doctor, or a level 12 thief. You know, something to give the players some meat to it. Something that will give them a challenge. This book goes over a lot of details. It goes over the Hittites. It goes over their armor classes, their natural armor classes, their backgrounds, languages they can learn. It goes over their special advantages, and I'll get that in a second. It goes over how to role play it. I like this one here. I'm going to read some of this real quick to give you an idea. So it's quoted as, like most evil creatures, few goblins ever become adventurers. That's true. Don't worry about that. But it also is true that few goblins rise to the top of their heaps. So you're not going to have that many bosses, leaders, or kings. So keep that in mind. Those that do are usually rare, for individualistic life of an adventurer is completely foreign to a goblin society, as I was talking about earlier, saying that they're always communal. Those few members of their race who display such tenacity are often killed by their brethren, for they believe they are insane. This is why you don't see lone goblins, because they're not normally what you would see. But also that points to how the hierarchy structure works, because if you're a loner, if you're a tactical person, if you're a very intelligent individual, then you're more than likely going to rise to the top of the ranks, and you're going to have a lot of challengers, people that don't like you, so you're going to have to fight them down. But as you do that, you gain more status and prestige. Or in this case, they were trying to leave, they beat them down, and they get away. And then they just can't go back. So keep that in mind. But, as always, they have their normal advantages. So goblins always have their night vision. It used to be called infravision. Use that as you like. You know, they have the ability to understand construction methods of natural and artificial cave structures. They can understand how it's built. They can't necessarily rebuild it, but how it's built. And then they have the normal stuff. Okay? They don't like light, and so on. So, one thing that you can keep in mind is that when you're building your new hierarchy to make this work, is weapons of proficiency can be anything. They can use any weapon. They can use an axe, a sword, a spike, they can use a bow, anything that's their size. So think if a dwarf could use it, or a halfling could use it, then a goblin can use it. Keep that in perspective. They're not going to be using, pole arms. They could use a spear, but to them it'd be a pole arm. So keep, their size in check. So, using these stats, we have the ability to make more larger environments, more, larger enemies. And you could easily make, an emissary from the god, like a level 15 or 18 or whatever, and have it be a thing. That would be cool, but you wouldn't have to necessarily do that. So goblins are at the bottom of the food chain, then I hope in this conversation that you'll be able to understand why and how goblins could be used past level 1. They're not just cannon fire to get you to level 2. They can be much more. So if you like this idea of covering individual monsters, let me know in the comments. Tell me what you do with goblins. I want to hear it. I want to know what you're doing with them. I want to know if you're not doing anything with them. Let me know. Either way, hope to see you next time, and have a good night.